Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Rodney Dixon, I think that was an excellent statement. It's very interesting to start this short comment from me with a reminder that even as this conference has been going on over the last few weeks, there has been a full public inquiry going in Church House, chaired by Geoffrey Nice QC, where they've taken evidence from a range of people about whether there is enough cause to believe that genocide has been taking place amongst the Uyghur by the Chinese government. There's some pretty harrowing testimony there. So I'm sure that if this reference to the International Criminal Court is taking place, then that inquiry will have huge importance in that. And the second part of it, which is really important, is that I set up with some other colleagues an organization called IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance of China. It's made up of parliamentarians on the left and the right in countries from the free world, countries that believe in democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. And we now have 20 countries from Japan to America. And we have 200 members in those countries as co-chairs and a few members in the parliaments. So there is a very strong set of evidence. And with that came a man called Adrian Zenz. Adrian has been doing a huge amount of work on what's been going on in Tibet and, of course, more latterly, amongst the Uyghur. And he produced some documents last year which absolutely categorically prove that this terrible and systematic abuse centered around government action is more than just to stop any violence. It's actually a violent act in its own, and he exposed forced sterilizations of the women, he forced labor camps, shipping many thousands of miles away, and children being taken from their families and taught to speak only Mandarin and to throw off any of their references to their ethnicity. So it's a privilege to be here today to follow up on that. As I said earlier on, we've set up IPAC, and therefore the whole idea here is to understand what is going on and why, and then expose it. The Chinese government, it must be clear, is not a government that cares very much about what people think of it or say about it. It is a dictatorial communist regime, and more recently, it has now become almost the plaything of President Xi. It was bad enough before, but President Xi's arrival has made it even worse. Their intolerance and their desperate behavior is affecting thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives in China and many beyond. Beyond the terrible persecution of the Uyghur, which literally seems to be a racist act, frankly, where it appears that not just Tibetans, not just the Uyghur, but even now the Inner Mongolians are facing very serious strictures. But it is the Uyghur that in scale and in approach have suffered perhaps the worst. And as I outlined earlier on, the treatment of the Uyghur is a shocking thing to behold in this particular time. Particularly as we look back to those events that took place in the 1930s and 40s, which should act as a constant reminder. And to that end, I thank the Jewish community for this conference. The Jewish community has been phenomenal in its support for these investigations into whether the Uyghur are being literally exterminated by an act of government. No doubt that collective memory of what happened to so many Jewish people during the Holocaust has galvanized everybody to do that. But it's going above and beyond even that, really, to persist in this process. And I thank them also for their support when we tried to get the British government in Parliament to accept that a British court could hear a case and could decide whether genocide was being committed. The government resisted that endlessly, but I think we won the argument and won the case, and we did so with a huge amount of support from the Jewish community, and I want to put my thanks on record for that. But we are, let's face it, dealing with a government which I think poses the most significant threat to the free world that we have seen, certainly since the Cold War, and some might think even more so. I mean, this is a government that thinks nothing of the terrible behavior with the Uyghur, Tibetans, nearly between 250,000 and 1 million Tibetans themselves are in labor camps, forced labor camps. As I said earlier on, cracking down on the linguistics and ethnicity of the Inner Mongolians. They have trashed Christian churches, arrested those who would call themselves priests of those churches. They have attacked the sect called the Falun Gong. There's been organ harvesting from them that we know of from very clear evidence. They have trashed an international treaty guaranteeing the rights of individuals in Hong Kong under the one country, two systems. Peaceful democracy campaigners have been arrested, banned from the LegCo, and now many of them fleeing for their lives to Western countries. We have a number here in China. We've opened up this passport system, which would allow them to come here. But still, it's a desperate act. And it's also a government that threatens Taiwan on a daily basis, threatens to invade it if they don't become part of China again, and has invaded and occupied the South China Seas, notwithstanding the fact that the UN has told it that it has no rights. Chinese government has completely ignored them. And so you can see straight away there's a government with arrogant and aggressive ambitions externally and absolutely authoritarian ambitions internally. The very fact that they are pursuing what, as I said earlier on, I think is beginning to be very clear as a racist policy to crack down on those who are not Han Chinese and to force the children of those who are not Han Chinese to become Han Chinese is an act of racial policy, which I have to say, on a scale like this, that we have not seen since the 30s and 40s. And I said the other day to many in my party and in Parliament, and I do not resile from this, we should remember that the same excuses were being made in the 1930s. Oh, well, Germany's only reasonable, it's been hard treated, it needed to have, these extra areas, and we shouldn't get too fussed about it, it'll be all right in the end. Well, we're saying very similar things about China. The UK and many other Western governments have become utterly dependent economically in exports and imports, and also in some very strategic areas. They've become completely dependent to China. We only have to look at the COVID-19 outbreak, which should have been discovered by the WHO much earlier, but that notwithstanding, millions have died. And during it, of course, we were unable in this country to get hold of any PPE equipment, masks, all the coverings for people working with people. I'm sure people died because they were unable to get. That is at the low scale of how dependent we are. Nuclear energy, electric car production, batteries, rare earth materials. China corners every one of these. And far too often the West has kowtowed to China for fear of upsetting them and losing business. Well, we need to stop. And IPAC is absolutely determined to bring to the attention of governments all over the free world that it's time that we no longer are able to turn a blind eye. We cannot pretend that this is okay. We cannot persuade ourselves that by doing this, China will become a reasonable country, as they thought. Opening up the markets has not turned China into a democratic country that understands the rule of law and human rights. So now we need to take action. We need to show them that their businesses and their economy will suffer if they carry on like this. We need to make sure that we place the moral purpose of our governments at the forefront. What greater moral purpose is there to save the lives of those tyrannized by others who would oppress them and end their own lives and the nature of their communities? We saw it before. We do not want to see it again. It is time to act.